Say hello to a new friend on an old road. Take a two-lane trip of memories into mysteries unknown. Come along for the ride. Jim Hinckley's America. Jim Hinckley's America.
Good morning, everyone. How are we doing on this beautiful, beautiful day? Start for another exciting week. I want to thank everybody who's joined us and shares the program, and even to those who are listening to it a little bit later in the day. But remember, this is an interactive program, so it's more fun, just like adventures, like road trips. They're more fun when they're shared. But I digress. Hey, I want to give a shout out. We're going to be talking about living history today and try to avoid getting too deep into the political woods. But since we're talking about living history, living time capsules, magical places that blur the line between past, present, and future, I want to give a shout out to our good friends at the Wagon Wheel Motel in charming Cuba, Missouri. Not only is this the longest or the oldest continuously operated motel on Route 66, it is, thanks to Connie Eccles and her team, it's an opportunity to experience the very, very best of Route 66, the very essence of the highway, if you will, and but with all the modern amenities. Step back in time a tad bit. Hey, okay. Our first stop today on our tour of places where you can blur the line between past and present is just north of Duluth, Minnesota. It is near Thunder Bay, Ontario. And if you happen to find yourself in the North Country, you know, this is often overlooked. But the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, up northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ashland, Wisconsin, the Apostle Islands, Isle Royale, one of the least visited national parks. I really recommend the Lake Superior Circle Tour, especially come summer, or that 2 weeks between mosquitoes and snow. I digress. Fort William Historical Park. This is an accurate recreation of the Northwest Company's inland headquarters. There are over 40 buildings, including the Artisans Era, a working farm, a Native American Anishinaabe encampment. It's a cultural mosaic, authentic period costumes and traders and artists, Scottish fur traders, Ojibwa, French-Canadian voyagers, furs, foodstuffs, muskets, medicine, birch bark canoes are being built. It's a hand-on experience. They'll actually work with you to allow you to paddle an authentic birch bark canoe out onto the river. You can play lacrosse with Native Americans as it was originally played. Fresh baked bread cooked in wood-fired ovens. And there's a lot of great festivals that enhance the sense of time travel. It's something I highly recommend if you're up in that North Country, and really you should consider that Lake Superior Drive some summer. Okay, we got some other ones I want to share with you here. Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia. I have mentioned this before, and I haven't been there for a few years. But over 500 structures. This place was a big, big boom town. It was a key center during the colonial era. But by the late 1890s, it had faded from prominence, and by the early 20th century, it was in near Ghost Town State. And DuPont and a few other business owners, big industrialists, decided to bring it back to life. And it's an actual town. People live there, but it's kind of interesting. People come home at night, park their cars on the street, and the next morning they clear the streets to give that time capsule feel. When I was there several years back, it was kind of fascinating to sit there in that early morning mist, and the cars would leave, and wagons would appear, and ox carts. Yeah, the cars would drive off into the mist, and then there would be an ox cart. It made it kind of interesting. Anyway, there's over 500 structures on 301 acres. It's the oldest, largest, and richest living history museum about the dawning of the American Revolution. You can see how Coopers fashioned barrels, printers set type, uh, mock trials. One of the things that's interesting about Williamsburg is they recreate a day. You know, you may be there on July 6th, but they take August 3rd. And whatever happened on that day, that's what they're doing. They the British soldiers may round up the kids and have them gather firewood. There may be a slave auction, uh, a trial. If a trial took place at that time, you may be called for jury duty as a recreation. It's really quite an interesting deal. And even they go to great lengths at the restaurants with the menus. Venison stew, bubble and squeak, things that have faded, that were popular during the colonial era. And real close nearby, within spitting distance, is historic Jamestown, Virginia. And it took several centuries for the Virginia colony located between the James and York rivers to really thrive. And you also have Yorktown there. They call it the Virginia's Historic Triangle. And it's really, really fascinating. They have an ongoing archaeological dig that young adults can get involved with. The reconstructed fort, they have interesting exhibits of guns. And I'm really glad that they have started incorporating, and had been missing for a long, long time, was the Native American history here. We have a tendency, it's fascinating that we have to think of it as revolutionary that they're starting to include slave auctions or Native American history. But, that's an important part of the tapestry. It's like having a jigsaw puzzle and deciding you don't like the color of these pieces, or you don't like what this picture, these pieces, the picture it's creating. So we just leave them out. And I don't understand all this, the new political catchphrases, these woke and, all this theories of education and stuff they're screaming about. I've always felt that it was difficult. How are you going to teach about the civil rights movement and not talk about the slavery in the United States, or the Jim Crow laws, or the KKK? How do you do that? And all of these are important parts of our national evolution. I digress again. The Nez Perce tourism in Idaho. Now, this one is out of Lewiston, Idaho. This is really, it's not so much a museum as it's an immersion. Yeah, you get a salmon, you can do salmon river whitewater paddle trips, things of that nature on the Snake River. But the key thing is horseback riding excursions, learning how the Nez Perce were able to acquire Appaloosas. They brush and saddle them, and there's outings, and they give you an immersion into the Native American culture before the arrival of Europeans. It's pretty fascinating, and I really have enjoyed that a lot. Another one. Now this gets into US 6. You probably have heard me talk about US 6 a lot because it's a highway that just fascinates the daylights out of me. It runs from the tip of Cape Cod to Bishop, California. It originally went all the way out to Long Beach, California. One of the places there is the Mystic Seaport Museum in Mystic, Connecticut. And it is almost a complete immersion in the 19th century when Mystic bustled as a shipbuilding and whaling center. You can sit down and watch sail makers and barrel coopers, shipsmiths, iron workers, and they've recreated wharf life as it was circa 1841. And that takes us to a great book I'd like to recommend that was written about that time. And it's called Before the Mast. It Get the exact title here for you. 2 years Before the Mast was published by Richard Henry Dana in 1840. And that's a good book to read before you visit Mystic Seaport. It gives you a real in-depth feel for the times. And while you're in the neighborhood, you might check out Plymouth Pawtuxet Museum near Cape Cod Bay. It's spelled Plimoth. Excuse me. The original spelling for Plymouth there. And everything is set up as it was. They're trying to recreate basically the period around 1630, a short few years after the arrival of the Pilgrims. In thatched roof houses, there's a dirt path through the forest. The actors are trained to speak in 17th century dialect and use the phrases of the time. And you can enter traditional Wampanoag homes, American Indians, but they'll talk in modern English about hunting, fishing, and the culture of the people who lived along this coast for thousands of years. And then you can jump on board a replica of the Mayflower 2, and your guide will discuss navigational instruments, astrolabes, quadrants, and other navigational techniques. And you can go down below board and just try to picture how 102 passengers, 35 crew, and just countless number of animals were crammed into this little ship, tossed about like a cork on the ocean. And it really adds a deeper understanding of what these people endured to come to the so-called New World. There is another place I want to recommend. Manitowoc, Wisconsin. This is on Lake Michigan. You can pick up the Badger. It's an old steam-powered ferry that crosses over to Ludington, Michigan. And that in itself is a lot of fun. But the Wisconsin Maritime Museum in Manitowoc, boy, that one is really pretty astounding. They have, get this, they have 4 submarines there, and you can do a self-guided tour through a couple of these. See, during World War II, the Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company was building submarines for the United States Navy. And a lot of people don't realize that. They're on the Great Lakes. But these submarines were, this was the only freshwater port in the United States to build submarines. And even though shipping was somewhat of a, challenge, think about it. You didn't have to worry about aerial attacks, and you didn't have to worry about attacks from the sea. It made perfect sense. They called submarine during the 1940s. They called them pig boats, and you can get an idea why when you tour these things. They actually had bunks for these people set up in the torpedo rooms for sleeping. It just in the torpedo tubes for sleeping. Wow. But the museum itself has almost 100,000 artifacts and photographs, works of art, documents, the complete maritime history of Wisconsin and the Great Lakes region, from initial settlement of American Indians all the way through the modern era. And the Great Lakes, it can't be understated. They're inland seas, if you're not familiar with the Great Lakes. And the museum, it's really astounding, especially in the 1850s through 1920s period, how heavy the traffic on the lakes were. It just mind-boggling. And there's also a great display of shipwreck memorabilia. And speaking of shipwreck memorabilia, since we're up there in the Great Lakes, up in Copper Harbor, Michigan, on Lake Superior, there's another museum that might be of interest. And that is the Keweenaw County Historical Society Museum. It's inside the old fog signal building at the Eagle Harbor Lighthouse Complex. It was operated by the U.S. Coast Guard. Copper mining was a big thing in this area from the early 1840s through about first years of the 20th century. And the early days, the only way to get into these towns was by ship. There was no roads. Early travelers had to anchor offshore, take boats into the shore. And of course, they started building Copper Harbor, Eagle River, and light stations were built. The museum has scale models of ships, galleries of photographs, stories of ships that sailed, navigational displays, relics brought up from shipwrecks. And it's fascinating. I'm a big fan of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and the whole Lake Superior Circle Drive. I've mentioned that previously, but it's something I highly recommend. That 2 weeks, like say, between mosquitoes and snow, it's unbelievable up there. One of the coldest winters that I have personally ever experienced was 2 weeks in June that I lived in Escanaba, Michigan. Once again, off topic, I know. I recommend, that you, when you travel, try to find a way to incorporate a living history museum into your adventure. And this is especially important if you have kids or young adults, teenagers. You've got to bring history to life. Static museums are interesting, but they're boring. And I have recently learned that there's been a pretty strong decline in attendance of static display museums. This is an era of people raised with video games and virtual reality. So you need to add interaction to make a museum of interest. And like I say, I try to avoid all this political stuff as much as I possibly can. I really don't understand the catchphrases, the slogans in order to sell for votes, critical race theory and woke, all these terms really have no relevance to me, and I find them somewhat bothersome. Because like I say, you cannot teach history as you want it to be. You teach it as it was, and that shows the evolution. When you look at American history, you realize all of our shortcomings and problems. You realize also, you discover the glory, the majesty, the what an amazing country this is. You see how we have progressed to try to live up to the ideals enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. And it also gives you a milepost to show you how far we've come and how much further we have to go to bring those ideal and lofty goals into a place of reality. And the living history museums are just so important for these. And there's some really good ones, like say Williamsburg. Oh, another one in Michigan, of course, Greenfield Village in Dearborn. That's another one's exceptional. Oh, Harvey Firestone and Henry Ford and Thomas Edison and a few others decided basically to preserve the world that they were forever changing. And they brought in historic buildings from literally all over the world and rebuilt them to create this village. And of course, you can get Model T rides. And when my son was about 11, you could go into a 1770s print shop, and my son was able to work with a printer and using ink and wooden blocks to make his own souvenir postcard. There was a shop there with the overhead cam pulley system and a steam engine, and they were using turning lathes, and they were showing how to make teenagers, the younger adults, how to make brass candlesticks, stick holders. Really important, these living history museums. Automotive, a good example of how the static museums are changing or fading. The Automobile Driving Museum in El Segundo, California. Some of the people involved with Jay Leno and others were bothered by the fact that young people really had no interest in cars manufactured much before the 1970s. And by young people, I mean under 40. Well, they got to thinking about it and looking at things. And what happens when you go to a car show? You see signs all over: do not touch, don't sit in, don't touch. Well, they decided to do something different, encourage people to touch, especially the kids. And they get high school. They've got a program where high school kids can work at the museum. And what they do, they work alongside mechanics to get cars roadworthy. They do things like check tires, clean the cars, things of that nature. Now, some of the particularly historic cars, of course, like Eleanor Roosevelt's Plymouth, they won't let people sit in, touch. But other cars, they encourage you to get behind the wheel. Sit behind the wheel, look at the dashboard. Then they take it a step further. That's why they call it the driving museum. Every week they take a few cars from the collection, put them out front, and you can buy a ticket, and they will take you for a drive. And you don't know, it could be in the rumble seat of a Model A, you could be in a DeLorean, a Pacer, a 1905 Cadillac. That's out in El Segundo, California, just a short distance south of Santa Monica Pier and the western terminus of Route 66. Well, my friends, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Got lots of projects in the works. Telling people where to go, sharing the adventures, what I do. And now I just got to find a way to tell people where to go and share the adventure and my ongoing quest to make it somewhat profitable. But either way, still enjoyable. Give another shout out to Miss Connie at the Wagon Wheel Motel. Be headed your way come October, if all goes well. And of course, want to give a shout out to Joe and Woody and the boys of the road crew for our theme song. Hey, before we wrap this thing up, anybody got any questions or anything they'd like to share this morning? Well, in that case, my friends, I will bid you adios, and we'll do this again next week. Take care, my friends.
Say hello to a new friend on an old road. Take a 2-lane trip of memories into mysteries unknown. Come along for the ride. Jim Hinckley's America. Jim Hinckley's America.
Vaya con Dios, mi amigos. Invite your friends next week, and feel free to share the program. We'll have it up on Facebook soon. Take care, my friends.